Hi everyone, Gritty back here again with another crime novel review. This one, the debut novel of author Gillian Flynn, Sharp Objects. Now, this review is not going to be as long as the one I did on Clockers. That is no reflection on the author or the novel itself. I'm just simply not as familiar with Gillian Flynn and Sharp Objects as I am with Price and the previously mentioned novel. That being said, I wouldn't be reviewing it if it wasn't worth your time and the time for me to review it. So, I don't know that much, so here's just a little bit of some cursory information about the author, Gillian Flynn. So, she wrote two other novels with which I'm familiar at least, Gone Girl and Dark Places. Gone Girl being clearly her most successful, clearly her most well-known. It was adapted in 2014 by the preeminent filmmaker David Fincher, and that movie stars Ben Affleck and Rosemary Pike. I made the unfortunate decision of watching the movie right after finishing Gone Girl, the novel, so the film unfortunately suffered by comparison. That being said, I did watch it recently after a few years had passed since I'd finished the novel and watched the movie, and it does hold up. It's very, very good. That being said, I really do recommend you read the book first and then give yourself a wide breadth before you dive into the movie. But it's definitely one of Fincher's better works, and just great overall performance by Rosemary Pike and a good serviceable performance by Ben Affleck. Okay, so Dark Places also was made into a movie adaptation, but I have not seen it. I don't think it got as much commercial success or as much critical praise as Gone Girl. But I can tell you that the book is also very, very good and definitely worth your time reading. And before I dive further into Gillian Flynn and then into the novel itself, I just want to mention how much I appreciate how atypical her works are. They're really just sort of about regular people who are thrust into catastrophe by way of a violent crime. So these are not gangster epics like Mario Puzo's. They're not hard-boiled detectives like Raymond Chandler's work, and they're not police procedurals like Michael Connelly in his Harry Bosch series. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those authors or those works. I'm definitely going to review them later. But this is definitely something that I always kind of wanted to read and wanted to see reflected. So just a crime occurs, or there's someone with criminal intent, and you have regular people who are not kind of in the game, who are not private eyes, who are not in the police force, dealing with the aftermath and the consequences of the crime. So just really, if you're looking for that, if you want a crime novel, but you're not really into the gangster aspect, you're not into hard-boiled, you're not into the police stuff, then definitely Gillian Flynn is the author for you. So a little bit more about Flynn. She's a former Entertainment Weekly columnist. You can actually find some of her reviews on Rotten Tomatoes for The Shield and The Wire. And she left to pursue a full-time writing career following budget cuts in 2008, which sounds like she was given the boot. But that's not what I found, so I'll leave that be. Okay, so here's the synopsis. Let's go straight into the novel Sharp Objects. Camille Preaker, a high-functioning alcoholic with a problematic past, works on the crime beat for the Daily Post, a struggling newspaper set in Chicago. One morning, halfway through finishing a typical story of childhood neglect, she is tasked by her editor, Frank Curry, to return to her hometown of Wind Gap, Missouri, to report on a missing girl, Natalie Keene, to see if there is any connection to the other murdered girl, Ann Nash, found dead in the previous summer. Nash specifically was found with her teeth pulled out. So there's this idea of these ritualistic type of killings. Both girls are the same age or around the same age, and so there's suspicion that this might be a serial killer, a small-town serial killer. Curry is eager to capitalize on the potential story, sensing there may be a serial killer in Wind Gap, and hoping that coverage of this story will push the Daily Post out of obscurity. So specifically, the Daily Post is described as a fourth-rate or fourth best-selling newspaper in Chicago. That obviously probably doesn't sound very good, especially because this was written around the time when there were budget cuts to newspapers. There was downsizing. People were switching to the internet, so definitely not a good time to be anything but the best in your printed media vehicle. Okay. While Curry is clearly fond of Camille, he reminds her that she has yet to live up to her potential, and that this story on the Wind Gap Killer would be a way for her to redeem herself. So we find this out later on as we read the story, that Camille and Curry have kind of a father-daughter relationship. Curry really does look out for Camille, really does care about her, but really thinks that she could be doing a lot more for her career. And we do find out why Camille has had a lackluster journalistic career. So she is high-functioning alcoholic, she self-harms, she has a history of being institutionalized, and all of this comes into play. Camille is hesitant to return to Wind Gap, fearing her overbearing, domineering mother, Adora, a hypochondriac Southern belle, as well as her teenage half-sister, Amma, who Camille barely knows. The Preakers are rich as they run a pig farm, one of the main sources of employment in Wind Gap, as well as one of the main catalysts for the local economy there. Upon return to Wind Gap, old wounds are reopened for Camille as she explores her troubled childhood and the death of her sister Marion. New wounds are also made as she makes tentative, treacherous allies with Chief of Police Bill Vickery, Kansas City homicide detective Richard Willis, and her cunningly mischievous sister Amma. Okay, so I'm not going to go into too many further details in the plot. I will elaborate a little bit more on Bill Vickery, Richard Willis, and Amma. But for now, let's go into some of the evaluation. So right off the bat, this was a very easy read. It's not long. The copy I have is about 250 pages. But I'm usually a slow reader. It took me about 2 weeks, let's say 10 to 14 days to finish Gone Girl, that being a 600-page novel. This novel I absolutely devoured. I read it within 3 days, and probably closer to being, you know what I mean? Like not that close to the 72-hour mark. Okay? So, really beautiful prose. You could call it lean, but I think that might give people the wrong impression if you call her prose lean. I think it's just very clear, very vibrant, very haunting. The prose and the way she writes just perfectly sets the mood and creates a claustrophobic atmosphere for Wind Gap, which you understand. Wind Gap is this fictitious small town in Missouri, so you really get the idea that this is a small town with small town values, where girls are supposed to be girls, men are supposed to be men, men are supposed to, go out for football, and they're supposed to go out on dates, and they're supposed to be, heterosexual and red-blooded, and girls are supposed to be, like I mentioned before with Adora, they're meant to be Southern belles. There's always, whenever you have a novel with third-person omniscient or third-person limited, there's this balancing act you have to make between telling the audience or the reader as much as you can about the world to try to make that sound kind of objective, while also capturing the voices of the characters, not just the protagonist, but the many different characters inhabiting this world. And Flynn is just a master of it. You can really tell that you get the impression from the narration style, from the prose, that this is how people just see the world of Wind Gap, as well as you can also see that there's a little bit of a step back and looking at Wind Gap and its community through cynical, wiser, and older eyes. Okay, so obviously the wiser, older eyes, that step back represents Camille, but a lot of the community, the idea of this is how it is, that reflects the rest of the characters, especially Adora, and especially someone like Bill Vickery. This is a crime thriller for sure, so the plot should be very, very important, but I find that like any great novel, the characters take center stage, and it is to the novel's benefit. You've got beautifully fleshed out characters. I've since read and listened to reviews of the novel where people said that there are no likable characters in this book, including and especially Camille. I honestly found that that was the opposite case for me. Maybe this speaks to how much of a weirdo I am. I really loved almost every character in this book. The only character I didn't like was Chief of Police Bill Vickery, just simply because he seemed so clearly inept and he seemed stubbornly obstructionist, not only in Camille's quest for the truth as a reporter, but just in the investigation itself into the two girls. But that was, that was the point of his character. And the character is fleshed out a lot more in the miniseries, which I'm going to get to later on in this review. But that being said, I loved Camille. I loved learning more about her. I even loved her mother, Adora, who from the outset is one of the antagonists of the novel. I just felt like she was so perfectly defined. Yes, very irritating, very difficult, super obstructionist to what Camille wanted to achieve, as well as kind of Camille's need to kind of be independent and seek out her own kind of mental health and self-soothing. But I honestly loved her. Every time Adora appeared on the page, I was happy. I was glad to read as much as I could about her. And Amma as well. Amma was one that made me a bit uncomfortable because she's described as 13, and the descriptions of her are, let's say, fairly sexual, fairly sensuous. I do understand why Flynn did that, because she wanted to show this world of teenage girls and kind of the mean girls aesthetic to Wind Gap and the teenage population. So just a lot of stuff going on here. Well, like I said, it's a thriller. It had a very easy plot with a few welcome detours for character development and world building. Probably if you're someone who loves Michael Connelly, who loves Raymond Chandler, and you're just looking for the next step, and you're more of a plot-oriented person, this might not be the novel for you, or you may find it a bit challenging. Because, again, it takes these detours to better show who the character of Camille is, to show that she's not really a noble, heroic character. She does make a lot of mistakes. But if you're patient and you're willing, then it's worth it. I really love when a novel, or a movie for that matter, has a very simple, straightforward plot, and they don't make the plot the hero of the story. They make the characters the heroes, as it should be. So let's see here. It has a lot of motifs of self-harm, so obviously if you're someone triggered by that, you should keep that in mind. It actually gets into really gory detail into self-harm. So I personally wasn't bothered by it, but I know people who are close to me who are triggered by this, who get very uncomfortable. So I really would recommend this novel to anybody, but if you're someone who really has an issue with suicide and self-harm, then please do keep that in mind. Other motifs include passive-aggressive bullying. Flynn herself has mentioned in an interview that this is kind of exploring how girls, especially in a very conservative community like Missouri, that girls are kind of supposed to be very placated. They're supposed to be very passive. They're supposed to be very obedient. They're not supposed to roughhouse. They're not supposed to be physical. And how their need for violence finds these other outlets that are just as nefarious, if not more so. So you see that especially with the character of Amma, who is the it girl, who is kind of the leader, not only because she's described as beautiful, but because she is so assertive. She comes from a very well-to-do family of the Preakers. And you see how even with her friends, she's really able to tear them down emotionally and very easily do so. You can kind of see her manipulative power with Camille, which is really interesting because Camille is an adult. She's not only older than Amma. Amma is a teenager. You could even say a tweener. And Camille is a woman who I think is in her late 20s. I want to call her middle-aged, but I don't think that she is. But yeah. Other motifs are peer pressure. That probably pretty obvious from the passive-aggressive bullying. Ideas of the Gothic. Again, this is often been described as a Southern Gothic, which is kind of funny because Missouri is the Midwest. It's not the South. That being said, obviously Missouri has many things in common with the antebellum South, such as slavery, the Confederacy, etc., etc. And kind of this really interesting idea that you see throughout the characters, not only the antagonists, but a lot of the more sympathetic characters like Camille, Curry and Richard Willis, how helping someone can inadvertently harm them. Right. Obviously, there's a lot of symbols related to, as the title suggests, sharp objects. So that's knives, that's getting tattoos, that's cutting, that's teeth, and that kind of feeds into the motifs and the themes of self-harm and harming other people under the guise of trying to help them. Okay, so obviously this was a novel that I really, really enjoyed. I also really enjoyed the limited series on HBO starring Amy Adams. I was surprised at how good it was, especially because this is such a short novel, and the adapted series is like 8 hours. So there's actually a lot of time filled, and they really did actually expand this world and expand the characters. So the character of Bill Vickery, even though he was my least favorite character in the novel, which is not a fault, that's not a bug, more of a symptom, or however that phrase goes. He's meant to be dislikable. But in the miniseries, I actually found that I was found him much more enjoyable. The opposite for me was with Richard Willis. So Richard Willis, just a very affable kind of homicide detective, kind of a devil-may-care sort of person. He and Camille have a semi-romance. You really get this idea that he is this kind of too cool for school type of dude. In the limited series, I believe because they need to give him an arc, he actually starts out quite unlikable. He seems kind of like he's over his head, and he seems to be serious to a fault. But that does get paid off as the series closes. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. So obviously my rating for this novel is 10 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to be reading it again. I'm going to be watching that limited series again. I think I'm going to always have these characters bouncing around in my brain, as well as the world of Wingab. So yeah, I rate this a 10 out of 10. I really recommend it, especially if you love crime thrillers and you're looking for something different from the typical hard-boiled or police procedural vehicle. And I will see you next time.